makeshift courtroom of a raw prairie town, Canada's Indian trials of 1885 prosecuted Indian and Métis charged with taking part in the so-called Riel Rebellion. Métis leader Louis Riel and his council have already been tried and convicted. Riel himself sentenced to hang.
Now, gentlemen,
now the Crown turns its attention to Indian leaders accused of supporting the Métis uprising. Pito Kahana Pauian, Poundmaker, chief of a band of Saskatchewan Cree, is now to face Canadian retribution. He is charged with treason felony. He speaks only Cree and cannot say a word in his own defense.
I did not understand treason felony. We have no Cree word for that. The translator, Peter Horry, says they say I did bad things to the Queen. That I threw sticks at her and tried to knock her hat off. I never met the Queen. I don't know if she wears a hat.
That Peto Kahana Wawin, otherwise called Poundmaker, did within the Dominion of Canada compass, imagine,
Peter says all these men are Rokimau, bosses, the Queen's and the government's bosses, that the government won and will now have its revenge, that I will be made an example.
Guilty or not guilty?
Kipakachin. Apochi. Namaya Kipakachin.
Namoya ne Pakichin.
Not guilty.
During all that time, there was treason in his mind, treason in his heart, and fraud in his actions. And he, an Indian, without cause of complaint against the government, with no grievance,
Of old, the Indian trusted in his God, and his faith was not in vain. He was fed, clothed, and free from sickness. Along came the white man and persuaded the Indian that his God was not able to keep up the care. The Indian took the white man's word and deserted to the new God. Hunger followed, and disease, and death.
Had remained loyal to his queen, loyal to the country, and had done everything in his power to protect the settlers and the country when in danger. But is it so?
For Poundmaker's descendants, but is it so, has hung in the air for more than a century. Gordon Tutusas lives on the reserve named for Poundmaker, his great-great-uncle.
I heard it many times from my family. The government wanted the Indians out of the way, period. That's the way the elders felt, and still feel.
For the government, insurrection had to be not only punished, but seen to be punished. The Prime Minister himself having a hand in assembling the government's legal team. Britton B. Osler, Thomas C. Casgrain, and David L. Scott, the mayor of Regina. The highest local judicial official was Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Richardson. For the local citizenry, the trials were a major event, a morality play of sorts. Like Riel's before it, the trial was prime public spectacle. With their reporters on site, the major dailies reflected an unsympathetic viewpoint.
Let all Indians understand that if one white man is killed, 10 Indians will suffer for it.
May it please Your Honor, gentlemen of the jury, The case before you is one of very considerable importance.
The trial began August 17, 1885, in Regina, the territorial capital. But it was on another summer day in 1876 that the government of Canada first took notice of Poundmaker at the Treaty 6 negotiations.
The governor mentions how much land is to be given to us. He says 640 acres, 1 mile square for each family. He will give us. This is our land. It isn't a piece of pemmican to be cut off in little pieces and given back to us. It is ours, and we will take what we want.
Like Poundmaker, Indian leaders were alarmed rapid settlement of the West would take place before their interests and needs had been dealt with. So too, the government had its interests and needs. The railroad was driving its way west, symbolically and physically cinching the land down tight in its grip. Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald promised a country from sea to shining sea. With the future of his government depending on it, the railroad would be his blunt instrument of nation building. Land would have to be wrested from the Indian nations to build the railroad and to provide for the influx of immigrant settlers. Treaty Number 6 would accomplish this.
When I commenced to settle on the lands to make a living for myself and my children, I beg of you to assist me in every way possible. When I am at a loss how to proceed, I want the advice and assistance of the government. The children, yet unborn, I wish you to treat them in like manner as they advance in civilization like the white man. From what I can hear and see now, I cannot understand that I shall be able to clothe my children and feed them as long as the sun shines and the water runs. In the presence of God and the Queen's representative, I say this.
By this simple touching of the pen, Poundmaker signed the treaty. With the land now gone, starvation was the issue. And with the government agreeing to provide rations in the event of famine, Poundmaker accepted the inevitable.
The government expected the Indians to die out, that treaties would come to nothing, the reserves would be no more, and the government would have everything for nothing. That was the intention and the agenda, that we would suffer the same fate as the buffalo.
The buffalo were central to Cree life, Poundmaker's name itself deriving from an ingenious system of hunting the buffalo, the building of buffalo pounds.
The buffalo were being destroyed. Sitting Bull told me the United States government made it a policy to exterminate them, letting packs of white men shoot them down mercilessly with long-range rifles. There were 60 million when I was a boy. Now there's only piles of bones scattered across the land.
For Poundmaker, it was the loss of the buffalo that had led to the treaty table, the subsequent loss of the land leading in turn to the reserve. In the autumn of 1879, Poundmaker accepted a reserve of 30 square miles, about 40 miles west of Battleford, in present-day west central Saskatchewan. Jim Tatusis Sr. has lived on the Poundmaker Reserve all his life. His grandfather was Poundmaker's brother, Yellow Mud Blanket. He talks of what he heard from the elders who were with Poundmaker as young people.
He wanted all Indians to live at peace with the white people, because they were going to have to live with them. But it's this rationing that they cut out. They were starved, they were coerced into what they did.
Poundmaker was committed to adopting the new way of life, but the land was rolling country, wooded, reflecting a tradition of hunting, not very suitable for agricultural pursuits. The crops failed, and the promises of government help remained only promises.
We expected the gristmill last summer, but in vain. The consequence is we do not know what to do with our wheat and have to starve beside our big stacks of grain. It is impossible to work with an empty stomach, and it will cause a great delay to the progress of our farms. I trust the government will be able to give us substantial help a little while longer until we are able to support ourselves. We are as anxious to be independent as the government is to get rid of the burden of supporting us.
Poundmaker led his band into nearby Battleford to perform baking dances for food. In faraway Odawa, Sir John A. Macdonald was not only the Prime Minister, but the Minister of Indian Affairs as well.
The Indians will always grumble. They will never profess to be satisfied. We've kept faith with them, and they've received large supplies. If there is an error, it is in an excessive supply being furnished the Indians.
Father Louis Cochin was a missionary to the Indians of the Battleford area. In his memoirs, he described the general conditions.
Famine was felt among the Indians in spite of the allowances distributed by their farm instructors. After the disappearance of the buffalo, the bacon and the cakes made with bad flour did not satisfy. I saw the gaunt children, dying of hunger, come to my place to be instructed. In the severest winter, their bodies scarcely covered with torn rags. It was a pity to see them. The privation made many die.
The government had made no treaties with the Métis, and the half-breeds, the new nation that sprang from their Indian mothers and European fathers, were disenfranchised. They had no legal title to land that had been their birthright for over 2 centuries. Now under Louis Riel's leadership, the Saskatchewan Métis declared a provisional government, Riel promising,
A war of extermination upon all those who have shown themselves hostile to our rights.
Raoul's tough words were soon put into action. The Métis Uprising began March 26, 1885, at Duck Lake. A small detachment of Northwest Mounted Police had been routed by a Métis force. A larger force of police and civilian volunteers sent out from Fort Carleton to take the Métis on. When the shooting was over, 9 civilians and 3 police lay dead. Raoul was confident he could now sway the Indians to his side.
I signed an agreement with the Queen, not to fight, to live in peace with the white people. I signed a treaty, and I will live up to that treaty.
The prisoner, the chief of band of Crees, were living under the government's protection and occupy a reserve situated about 40 or 50 miles west of Battleford. They were living peaceably on their reserve until the end of March last, when the prisoner, with his band, left the reserve and marched towards Battleford. On their approach, the residents of the town became alarmed and withdrew into the police barracks there for protection.
Prosecutor Scott made a direct link between the Battleford residents taking refuge in the fort and the approach of the Indians. But in fact, the townsfolk and settlers were already aware of the outbreak of war at Duck Lake, their panic further compelled by events closer to home. Stoney Indians, the Assiniboine relatives of the Cree, had just murdered farm instructor James Payne, as well as a farmer, Barney Tremont.
Poundmaker came to Battleford to get food. He had no intentions of plundering. He was disturbed by the news at Duck Lake and wanted to see Indian agent Mr. Ray. He wanted to give his assurances that he had nothing to do with the Métis Uprising. He arrived in Battleford, was surprised the town was deserted.
Do you remember the day of March the 28th last?
Yes.
Did anything happen that day?
We heard that the Indians were coming down in a body from their reserve.
What Indians?
Poundmaker's Indians and others.
Do you know the prisoner?
Peter Ballantyne was a Battleford merchant, and though a half-breed himself, had been engaged by the Indian Department as a secret agent to travel about the reserves to report any signs of trouble.
And was the prisoner there at that time?
Yes.
And what was the prisoner doing?
Well, he asked me if I could send word to the Indian agent, and I wrote a note to Mr. Ray, but when I saw how they acted, I told Mr. Ray that I would not advise him to come across.
What were they doing?
Well, they started helping themselves to Mr. Ray's hay, and every one of them was armed. Those that hadn't guns had tomahawks. Some of the boards were knocked through and the windows, and some of the buildings were burnt.
And what was in the buildings?
Dry goods and groceries, but there was very little left.
Mr. Ballantyne, did Poundmaker show any signs of anything more than on previous occasions when he came to see the agent to ask for some supplies?
Not himself, but his band did.
That is what I want to get at. The difference between his conduct and the conduct of any of his band. Poundmaker himself did not show any signs of that kind.
No, he kept still. He kept quiet. He sat down in one place and he said very little.
Robert Jefferson was the farm instructor on Poundmaker's reserve, agreeing to testify against Poundmaker in exchange for immunity. Given his presence in the rebel camp, the Crown had considered laying charges, but decided to use him as a witness instead, basing its case essentially on Jefferson's testimony.
You know the prisoner very well.
I know him.
The time that the prisoner left his reserve, did I understand?
When was it you noticed so many of the Indians had gone?
I could not say.
The government had retained Beverly Robertson, a Winnipeg attorney, for the defense. Over 100 Indian and Métis face a docket full of serious charges, including murder. Robertson must defend them all. He's been given little time or resources to mount a defense.
Now, you say you saw Poundmaker in the morning, and he then told you he was going to Battleford.
Yes.
It was a thing they'd done before many times, wasn't it?
A thing they had done before, certainly. Several times.
And did it necessarily imply any hostile intention?
No.
He went to ask for tea and tobacco.
I don't remember his saying what he was going to do, but I particularly remember his saying he was not asking anyone to go with him. But if they liked to go, he would not stop them.
In the days that followed, Poundmaker's camp was moved to the area of Cut Knife Hill, fearing retribution for the Battleford looting and the stony murders of Payne and Tremont. This location was more secure with its commanding view of the surrounding countryside. Alarmed by all that was taking place, people sought leadership and flocked to Poundmaker's camp. With the militant Stoney and Cree already congregated there, the camp now swelled to over 1,000. Prime Minister MacDonald mobilized militia units and mustered troops in response to the Métis uprising and the declaration of provisional government, and now had a railroad to transport a force 8,000 strong heeding the call of their country.
While you were there in Cut Knife on the month of April, did anything occur unusual?
Oh, yes. Everything was unusual. There were so many things occurred.
Were there any visitors?
Yes.
Who?
An Indian and a half-breed came up from Raoul.
Did they bring anything with them?
They brought a letter.
Did you see the letter?
I did.
Where did you see it?
In Poundmaker's tent.
Dear brothers and relatives, since we wrote to you, important events have taken place. The police have attacked us. We met them, and God gave us the victory. Bless God with us for the success He has kindly granted us. Rise, face the enemy, and if you can do so, take Battleford, destroy it, save all the goods and provisions, and come to us. Louis David Riel, ex ovidi.
Exhibit 2. Cut Knife Hill, 29th April, 1885. To Mr. Louis Riel.
A letter found among Riel's papers became the prosecution's key evidence. Dictated to Jefferson, it apparently proved Poundmaker's band was intent on joining the rebellion, and that Poundmaker had been one of its authors.
From all places where your work is in progress. We are camped on the creek, just below Cut Knife Hill, waiting for Big Bear. Here we have killed 6 white men. We have not taken the barracks yet. That is the only entire building in that entire building. All the cattle and all the horses in the vicinity. We have taken all the horses in the vicinity. Some soldiers come from Swift Current, but I do not know their number. We have here guns and rifles of all sorts, but ammunition for them is short, if it be possible. We want you to send us ammunition of various kinds. We are weak only for the want of that. Upinawe Wind, Musinas, Metewais, B.A.Chu, and Poundmaker. Mr. Jefferson, who signed the name Poundmaker here to the bottom of this letter?
I did.
Have you any authority from the prisoner?
Well, I considered that I had. I would not have written it had I not had. That is very certain.
Now, on the occasion on which that letter was written, you say that Poundmaker, Upinawe Win, Musinas, and P.H.U. were all there when this was dictated.
Yes. And Chickakum. Chickakum was there. Boss Bull, they call him, I think.
None of these were Poundmaker's men, except Upinawewin.
No.
Now, you say you couldn't tell which of them was running it. I think that was the expression you used.
No, it was very difficult.
So much so, that when you had finished writing that letter, you asked whose name you were to put to it.
Yes.
Now, you've told us that your memory is not very clear about these things happening at that time. And you swore at first when speaking about that you had Poundmaker's authority to put Poundmaker's name there. But you went on to say that when Upinawewin told you to put Poundmaker's name to it, you asked Poundmaker if you should do so, and he said yes.
Yes?
Now, Poundmaker says you are mistaken in saying he said yes, put his name to that. May it not have been one of the others who said yes?
No. Oh, no, it could not have been. Poundmaker and Upinawewin were behind me, to the side. So to look to Poundmaker for his assent, I had to turn my head to the side. I don't think I was mistaken.
Mightn't Upinawewin have said yes when you asked that question?
No. I wasn't looking at him.
But you heard the voice.
I don't believe I was mistaken.
You don't believe you're mistaken?
No.
But you might be mistaken.
I may be mistaken,
You
yes.
may be mistaken.
Oh, yes.
On April 24th, Colonel William Otter led a company of police and militia into Battleford, relieving the siege of its citizens, still expecting to be attacked at any moment. Though his orders were to sit tight, the ambitious Otter had an eye on his career.
When Otter got into Battleford, he heard what happened. Oh, gee, he wanted to punish Poundmaker. So he hired a half-breed by the name of James Bird. I heard James Bird tell us a story about the fight. I was sitting just next to him when I was a little boy, about 12, 13 years old. He had a very fast horse. When Otter heard that, he hired him to come and scout where the camp was. So Otter ordered everybody to get ready. Otter had it fixed so he just hit that camp at daylight and shoot the camp while they were sleeping. When he got there was nothing. The camp was gone. They'd moved the camp the day before. Well, they rode around and looked around, and finally they located the tracks and followed the track where the camp had moved. And there was an old man, they were Jacob, they call him Jacob Red Deer. Yeah, old Jacob. Early in the morning, he woke up and he heard a wagon wheels. He jumped up and ran to the edge of the hill. By God, the troops were starting to come up the hill.
Colonel Ershmer, you are one of the superintendents of the Mounted Police Force.
Yes.
What was going on Cut Knife Hill on the 2nd of May?
Colonel Otter went out with a strong party for reconnaissance. On ascending the hill at Cut Knife after crossing the creek, a party of men fired on us.
Did you see the prisoner at all that day?
I saw the prisoner on 2 occasions that day.
What was he doing?
He was driving in a buckboard on the first occasion I saw him.
And was he doing anything else?
Well, he looked to me as if he was general of the whole party.
How far was he from you the first time you saw him?
We laid the gun at about 1,500 yards and hit the man alongside of him.
How far was he the second time?
About 2,000 yards.
You say you could recognize him at that distance?
I have glasses. We carry glasses.
And it was through that you recognized him?
Not the first time. The first time I recognized him with my naked eye. I know him very well.
The impression on your mind was that it was Poundmaker.
I know that it was Poundmaker. I'm certain of it.
At 1,500 yards?
At 1,500 yards.
Driving in a buckboard?
Driving in a buckboard.
It wasn't a rebellion. It was the government troops that came and attacked the camp while they were sleeping. Well, naturally, they had to defend themselves.
Otter's troops were slow in taking advantage of their surprise attack, and after 7 hours of fighting, Colonel Otter withdrew his troops in retreat. They were now extremely vulnerable to an annihilating counterattack, but Poundmaker held the warriors back.
It was good to defend ourselves, our wives and children. You have beaten the enemy back. Let that content you.
But Poundmaker's warriors would not be held back for long. With Raoul's emissaries in camp stirring up the Cree, a soldier's lodge was set up. The militants took over, the camp packed up and headed for Raoul and the Métis at Batoche.
According to Cree historians, it should have taken the camp no more than a week to reach Raoul. But 10 days later, they were still in the battle for vicinity. Poundmaker's lack of cooperation was slowing things down, effectively preventing Raoul's agents from succeeding in their mission. And by now, the Canadian Army was within miles of the Métis stronghold here at Batoche.
A member of Poundmaker's band, Grey Eyes, was called as a witness for the defense.
Who was in command of the camp at Cut Knife?
The soldiers.
What power has the chief when a soldier's lodge has been put up?
The chief has no control over anyone when that soldier's tent is up.
Who has the control?
The soldiers.
Was Poundmaker one of the soldiers?
No.
Had Poundmaker enough influence to prevent the Indians from going away to join Raoul?
He couldn't stop them from going. He tried to take us away one day from the rest of the party, and he could not manage them.
Poundmaker tried to take you away?
He tried 3 times.
Did you hear Poundmaker at any time saying anything about wishing to go away to Devil's Lake?
Yes.
It was a well-known thing that he wanted to go away to Devil's Lake.
Yes.
It was in the other direction from Batoche altogether, wasn't it?
Yes.
And would have taken the Indians out of trouble altogether and kept them away from Raoul.
It would have kept them away from Raoul, yes.
But the Indians decided to go to Batoche.
Yes.
Now, are you aware that Poundmaker and Yellow Mud Blanket and some others actually tried to get away themselves to Devil's Lake?
Yes, I know it.
Tried to get off by themselves when they couldn't control the Indians, and they were stopped and prevented from doing so.
Well, I don't think it was because they couldn't control the Indians then.
The fact is, they tried to go.
They tried to go, yes.
And they were turned back.
They were turned back.
By whom?
By the Stony Indians, I believe.
One last thing, Mr. Jefferson. What is your relationship to the prisoner?
Well, he would be my brother-in-law.
Your brother-in-law?
Yes.
Meaning that you are married to his wife's sister?
Yes, I am.
Battalion! Charge left! Flank flank! Forward! Oil grenade! Left trigger!
4 days after it had begun, the Battle of Batoche was over. The Métis reduced to shooting rocks and nails, defeated by an overwhelming force. With the news of the surrender of Raoul, Métis activists in Poundmaker's camp abandoned the cause. Now his people looked to Poundmaker to save them. Perhaps more than anyone, he knew it wasn't simply an army that needed to be surrendered to, but the inevitable all-encompassing onslaught of a new world order that would change theirs forever.
Oh, hey, see all these women? See all these children? They are the ones we must save. I know that you are very brave in fighting against the whites, and you can hinder them very much, but we will yield to their number. And something tells me that our children will have their lives safe. I prefer to surrender myself at the risk of being hung, rather than to shed streams of blood by a resistance which has no more reason to be. Let everyone who has a heart do as I do and follow me.
Though not the chief of all the camp, Poundmaker was the only man who could speak for the whole camp. By accepting the lead for the surrender, he exposed himself to being considered by the authorities as the great chief of the whole camp.
We came into Battleford on the 26th, all our guns loaded onto wagons. I offered my hand to the general in fellowship, but he would not take it. I told him, "You have us in your hands and can work your will on us. All that we ask is that the woman and children might go unharmed." He arrested me and I did not resist. I gave him my rifle and war club.
Upon you, the duty is to determine what reliance you will give this evidence. You should ask yourselves what this man was doing. A loyal man, professing loyalty and leading a band of Indians. He is getting a living. He is getting his bread at the hands of the crown. Does this evidence bring home so conclusively to your minds, one and all, that this prisoner was mixed up in these acts? Then you should not hesitate to perform what I think is your duty. Find a verdict of guilty. If, on the other hand, you do not believe, then you will find a verdict of not guilty.
In the House of Commons, debate raged over the government's alleged culpability in letting the situation in the Northwest reach a boiling point, all in order to serve the government's agenda, the building of the railroad. For MacDonald's government, the stakes were high. There was still a brand new country to settle. Newspapers had been reporting, "The uprising has checked the development of the country." The 79,000 who came west in 1885 did so in the confidence the Indians would be controlled and finally subjugated.
Guilty. Poundmaker, have you anything to say why sentence should not be passed upon you? I am ready to hear anything you have to say now.
How? We be squinny hekwa.
No moyuma. Ochipim skoik. Niuma. Utepe to taiswan. Uitaske to enoma. Epoksemo anutako ni paoyan.
You did not catch me. I gave myself up. You have got me because I wanted peace.
Namoy na taong gisui chison. Pag isui to tao yego.
I cannot defend myself. You may do as you like with me.
Poundmaker, the sentence which the court pronounces upon you, for the offense of which you have been convicted, is that you be imprisoned in the penitentiary at Manitoba for 3 years.
No, it's nga pa kusayman. Sema ka ko tigaw yan, igo ya, kantok po ko yan.
I would rather prefer to be hung at once than to be in that place.
I said I would rather be hung than be imprisoned, and I meant it then. But if I could see my children again, I would rather not die.
The trials continued unabated. 8 death sentences were handed down for murders committed during the rebellion. Indian people were rounded up and forced to witness the public hangings at Fort Battleford. Poundmaker contracted a devastating illness, most likely tuberculosis. Rather than face the embarrassment of having him die in prison, the government released him 8 months into his sentence. Poundmaker returned to his reserve, itself suffering all manner of government retribution. He devoted himself to gathering support for the just treatment of his people, traveling 200 miles on foot to Blackfoot country. Shortly after, he broke a blood vessel and died of a lung hemorrhage.
After his death, Poundmaker's remains were brought back to this hill where the battle took place. Historians have now concluded that he was in fact loyal unto death. His descendants question the charge of treason. We were and are treaty Indians, not subjects of the crown, but partners in the treaty process. It's not even enough that he be pardoned. The conviction should be overturned.
You are the same people who fought so well and so bravely on Cut Knife Hill. But you are going to have to fight again, the hardest kind of fight. You must fight yourselves in this new way of thinking, that we are less than they are, because it is not true. It would be so much easier just to fold our hands and not make this fight. To say I, as one man, can do nothing. I grow afraid only when I see people thinking and acting like this. We all know the story about the man who sat beside the trail too long, and then it grew over, and he could never find his way again. We can never forget what has happened, but we cannot go back. Nor can we just sit beside the trail. Our old way of life is gone. But that does not mean we should sit back and become imitation white men. Our beliefs are good. The spirit served us well. I am more proud than I ever was before that I am Cree.